So other life-saving things. So unfortunately, this is something that we got to talk about. So there's a huge national campaign right now that's called Stop the Bleed, because we know nationally, not just in St. Paul, but nationally, violence, it's particularly violence associated with what we call penetrating trauma, meaning like stab wounds or gunshot wounds, are going up. And when we have these type of wounds, a lot of times it can be anywhere on the body, but if it's somewhere like on the arm or the leg, you have these big arteries in your arm, you have a big artery in both legs, and those are the main ones that bring the blood from the heart to the rest of the body. And if they get shot or they get stabbed, you can bleed a lot of your blood volume out, and it might happen really, really fast before EMS can even get there. So one of the big things about Stop the Bleed is kind of how do we help stop the bleed? How do we help prevent further blood loss if we find somebody who's been a victim of this penetrating trauma? So one of the first things you can do, so let's not go so extreme. Yeah, you cut your finger with the kitchen knife because you're cutting up some carrots. What's the first thing you do if you cut your finger?
Stop the bleed.
Yep, how do you stop the bleeding?
Putting pressure on it.
Putting pressure on it, right? So it's pretty easy to kind of put pressure on like your fingertip or on your hand if you cut your hand. But what if it's a bigger wound or it's in a bad spot like an artery that's pumping blood, like in your leg or in your arm? You still want to do the same thing. You still want to do that direct pressure as soon as you can. But that requires usually for you to not, so like if this is my wound here, do you think I'm like getting good pressure if I'm using like one finger? Probably not. What if I'm just kind of like spreading my hand out like this and kind of trying just to cover it up? Probably not getting a ton of pressure on that artery, right? We might be kind of helping the skin pieces, but if it's truly that artery, we're not doing very much just by like kind of lightly putting our hands on it. The big thing you want to do is really get probably a little bit more surface area than one finger, maybe 2 or 3, and you are pushing down, and you're pushing down almost till you feel like the bone. It's going to probably hurt to the person you're pushing on, but that's the right amount of direct pressure that you want to be applying in order to help stop that bleeding. Another tool that you can use is something called a tourniquet. So not everyone has a tourniquet lying around their house. What did this kind of look like though? A belt. So you could use a belt. If you don't have a belt, you could like roll up a towel, use a bed sheet, anything really that you can kind of get to cinch down on somebody. Let's say this is my leg. And this is my knee down here, and this is my hip up here, and the wound is here. Do you think it's helpful for me to cinch down below where the wound is? No. Where should I be cinching it down if I'm going to put on a tourniquet? Right, above it, because the artery runs down, and you want to push on that artery above where the wound is, so then you can stop the blood here, so it's not coming out that hole anymore. So tourniquets, we're putting it on, we're going to put it on. Do you think if I just kind of go like this?
No.
Is that applying very much pressure? Probably not. What if I do a pretty good effort and I, make it look nice? It's not falling down. Do you think I'm getting that artery though? Pushing down on it? No. So this is something where you are really, really cinching down. So like in the hospital, when I teach our residents how to do this, I'm like, if you're on the side of the bed, you hold that side of the bed, you hold that extremity, and you are cinching down as hard as you can. It's going to hurt, but it's going to stop the bleeding. There's this little piece here, and this can just help tighten it down. So you twist it. And then you put it, kind of keep it like that. And that's your tourniquet applied. Same thing with a belt though. You just cinch it down as much as you can. Or if you had a towel, tie it around, just tie it as tight as you can. and cinch it down as best you can. But it should be super, super tight, and they should be in pain when you do this. And then the last thing that I kind of wanted to show you too was, so one other thing you can do if it's like a super deep wound, let's say it's not in an extremity or an arm or a leg, and so you can't put a tourniquet on. Let's say it's more like in the armpit, in the groin area. There's nothing above it really that you can compress. So what we really teach is actually kind of packing the wound. So packing doesn't mean taking like some gauze. You could take a towel, whatever you have. Do you think we're getting good pressure on something if I kind of have it all fluffed up like this and push it down? Not as much, right? So there's definitely there, but it's not really putting much pressure on it. So when we think about packing a wound to help stopping the bleed, it's more about thinking about filling the whole space as much as possible tightly, so compactly. So oftentimes what we end up doing is we have gauze and we just stuff it down, but we're pushing it down into every little crevice, in every little spot, like that. Because then it's actually giving some compression to the area, and it's kind of taking up the entire area. So hopefully that means that the blood kind of stays where it should be instead of coming out. And again, it gives that compressive piece that you can't get without, because you can't use their tourniquet. It might be super deep if it's in the belly that you can't really push on it enough. So putting this gauze in there or a towel or a sheet and putting it all in all the spaces and making sure you're pushing down really hard. Each time you put a little bit more in, that's going to compress the area for the patient.
A really good question came up. A lot of people are like, oh, will I get in trouble if I do something wrong, right? If I call 911, they're on their way, but I know that there's a lot of bleeding happening and I need to stop it. Or if there's CPR, you're doing CPR on somebody, right? There's a law called the Good Samaritan Law. And what that is it covers you as a good Samaritan, as just somebody out in the community, right? That you, as long as you're acting in good faith, trying to help somebody, you're not legally, nobody's gonna come back and legally hold you responsible if something didn't go right, right? And that's a protection thing. A lot of people said, we had that question, what if I mess something up and do it wrong? And that's why people don't want to do anything. I think that's really important to spread that message too. There's laws in place specifically to make sure that you aren't held accountable as long as you're acting in good faith, trying to do the right thing for somebody. They're not going to come back, they can't come back and hold you responsible if it didn't turn out the way they wanted it to turn out. If that makes sense.